I wanted her, but ended up kissing her father. My best friend must not catch me with her father. I had to blink twice, maybe 3 times when I saw it. $10,000. Just like that. I scrolled up, rereading the one-word text Mr. Richardson sent earlier. Sent. Not even a smiley face or an emoji, just cold hard business. You'd think he was transferring pocket change, not 10 grand. I tried to drown out the chatter of the campus around me. Students hustling to their next class, the constant drone of cars, a skateboarder whizzing past, but my brain was too focused on that number on my screen. It wasn't the first time he sent me money either. The last transfer? Over 100 grand. Paid my tuition without blinking, all because of a deal he wanted to make. There were strings attached to his money. A deal I told him I never agreed to. But he kept paying my bills for some reason. I quickly typed up the message. Thank you, sir, but I can't do it. Less than a minute later, his response came in. It's fine. Take care of yourself. That's all? How could he be so nonchalant? So confident? I was lost in my thoughts when something, or rather someone, crashed into my back, nearly knocking the phone out of my hand. Giddy up, cowboy! The familiar voice and the scent of coconut shampoo gave her away before I even saw her face. Annie, my best friend. She locked her arms around my shoulders and her legs wrapped around my waist as I steadied her with one hand, my phone somehow still secure in the other. Annie, seriously? I spun around, making her shriek with laughter. Couldn't help but grin. Her joy was contagious, a lightness I desperately needed after staring at the ridiculous amount of money. Put me down, you ogre, she giggled. When I finally set her down, she swayed a little, her dark hair falling over her face in a mess that still looked perfect. Annie was effortlessly beautiful. Her skin always glowing, green eyes sparkling like she was in on a joke the rest of the world didn't get. And then there was her smile, the same smile she inherited from her dad. Looking at her reminded me of her father, the man who kept sending me money. The man I had only met once prior to this mess. I forced myself to look away, stuffing my phone in my pocket before I started spiraling again. Where are you headed now? She asked, bouncing on her toes like she had caffeine running through her veins instead of blood. All done with classes, I said, trying to sound casual. Probably just gonna head back to the dorms. Or, she dragged out the word, tilting her head with that mischievous glint in her eyes, you could come over for dinner with me. My dad is insisting that I come home tonight. The mention of her dad made my stomach flip in a way that had nothing to do with hunger. Kent Richardson. Just thinking about him made my palms sweat. Man was, well, if I was being honest, he was intimidating as hell. He had his way of looking at you like he could see right through you, right into your soul. The first time I met him, he barely spoke a word, but he kept staring at me. And then there was his voice, deep and smooth like velvet, the kind that could lull you to sleep. Women probably threw themselves at him without a second thought, and I couldn't blame them. I don't know, Annie. I started already thinking of an excuse. Why don't you go with Cody? Her boyfriend, classic poster boy with an ego larger than heaven. But Annie cut me off with those damn puppy eyes. The ones that could convince anyone to do just about anything. Especially at me. After all, I had a little crush on her. Please, Lloyd. I sighed, knowing I was already losing this battle. Fine, I grumbled. But only if you promise to stop doing that thing with your eyes. She beamed, looping her arm through mine as she practically dragged me toward a parking lot. Deal. Now let's go before you change your mind. As we walked, I tried to steady my racing thoughts, telling myself it's just dinner. Just a meal at the Richardson house, with Kent probably seated at the head of the table, watching me. That evening. The Richardson mansion was on a different level altogether from my cramped dorm. Just waiting in the living room just felt like trespassing into a whole other universe. One where marble floors gleamed and gold accents on furniture screamed might. Loads of it. I shifted on the plush couch, trying not to sink too deep into the cushions. Heavenly smell wafted in from the kitchen, making my stomach growl embarrassingly loud. That chef back there was working magic, and all I had today was a cup of cheap instant noodles. I started tugging on the hem of my shirt, trying to distract myself from the gnawing hunger. It was hard, though. The money that Mr. Richardson said today was still sitting untouched in my account. Didn't spare a dime more than absolutely necessary, except for tuition. I was already terrified that I'd end up owing Mr. Richardson more than what I was already. If he ever got mad, or if he decided it wasn't worth the hassle. No, couldn't think about that. Penn State tuition wasn't something I could cough back up even if I tried. Footsteps on the stairs pulled me out of my thoughts. Annie's bubbly laughter echoed down the hall, and I straightened up, rubbing my sweaty palms on my jeans. When she came into view at the top of the staircase, she was practically skipping, her hair bouncing with each step. Annie Richardson was beautiful. Right behind her was her father, and as much as I tried to keep my eyes on her, they couldn't help but drift at him. He stood well over 6'4", broad at the shoulders, his tailored shirt fitting in a way that made him hard to look at anywhere else. His slightly graying hair was styled to perfection, not a single strand out of place. Then, when he turned to me with his cold green eyes, it felt like all the air in the room had grown thin. My heart began to pound, and I forgot to breathe. "Lloyd," he greeted, my name rolling off his tongue like fine whiskey. "Any allergies that you know about?" At that moment, I thanked Sister Leah for naming me. Usually, children abandon Catholic orphanages with stuck-up biblical names like Bartholomew. No offense, but I wouldn't have rolled off Mr. Richardson's tongue quite as well as Lloyd did. Remember his question? My brain started working again. No, I mean, I can eat anything. No allergies." He nodded, and I swore there was a slight twitch at the corner of his lips, like he was amused by my sudden stammer. But before I could think too much about it, Annie tugged at his arm, pulling him toward the dining room. "Come on, Dad. Lloyd's starving. He probably hasn't eaten all day," she teased, and I felt my face heat up. She was spot on. Ken said nothing, but I caught the flicker of his eyes back to me, thoughtful, calculating even. And I wanted to curl up, fold in on myself, and disappear. But this wasn't a DC Comics movie. I trailed after them into the dining room, where a table for three was set up and waiting for us. Dinner was a blur of sensations. Rich, creamy pasta, tasty kicks from lemon chicken, and fresh-baked bread. None of which proved possible to resist. I ate like a man possessed as each bite filled the hollow of my stomach. I was starving. It wasn't until Annie nudged a glass of water in my direction that I realized that I was practically inhaling the food. "Pace yourself, Lloyd," she said with a laugh. "You're gonna choke." Where are my manners? I slowed down, feeling my face flush, but it was Ken's voice that actually made me freeze. "Not eating well at school?" he asked, and his voice was casual, but there was something in it that made the hairs on my back of my neck stand up. He's going to talk about the money he sent? What's Annie going to think of me? Is she going to think I'm her friend just because her father is sending me money? "He's got a sponsor, Daddy. Someone who keeps paying his bills," Annie interrupted, not giving me time to fabricate anything. "But he won't spend the money, and he also won't let me buy him food." Silly, isn't it? I liked Annie. I really did. She had a kind soul, but she also saw life through rose-colored glasses. I had a freaking crush on her. Spending her money would only make me look worse next to her blonde-haired boyfriend. My fork clattered against the plate as I half-choked on my last bite. "Annie," I started to say, but then my voice strangled into a squeak as Kent interjected. "If someone's paying your bills, why aren't you eating? Use the money." His words were soft, but the underlying command was clear. A wave of nausea rolled over me, all at once, the delicious meal I'd devoured seemed like a really bad idea. My stomach twisted, and I could barely stammer out. I'm fine. I'm not hungry anymore." I didn't feel so good. Annie's confused gaze bounced between us, completely unaware of the tension simmering just below the surface. "Daddy, don't be so serious. Lloyd's just being frugal. It's smart." But Kent didn't turn away from me. He saw right through my excuses, right into the fear that was bubbling up inside of me. I couldn't take it. The room felt too hot, too small, and I needed to get out of here. The next thing I knew, I was standing up and mumbling, "Thank you for the meal. I have to get back to my dorm." I didn't feel so good. Annie's confused gaze bounced between us, completely unaware of the tension simmering just below the surface. Annie appeared at my side in an instant, worry creasing her brow. You okay, Lloyd? You're really pale. Ken stopped eating and his cutlery landed on his plate with a loud clang. No need to leave. Are you okay? I'm fine. I just need to lie down for a moment. I managed, though I was far from it. My throat tightened as if all the food was trying to climb out of my throat. I felt terrible. Take him upstairs to get some rest. I'll call Dr. Young to take a look at him. Kent pushed his chair backwards and rose up, towering over me. I opened my mouth to refuse, but he shut me up with a stern gaze. Annie supported my arm, helping me upstairs. Usually I'd be happy to have this much body contact with her, but today wasn't that day. I leaned against and followed her upstairs. On the second flight of stairs, she suddenly slapped her forehead. Oh no! I just remembered my room is a total mess. Maids aren't allowed in there unless I ask for a cleanup. You know how it is. No, I didn't. I went straight from the orphanage to college dorms when I turned 18, so having maids sound like fiction. She bit her lip, then sighed. Okay, just rest in the room next to mine for 10 minutes, okay? I'll get them to clean up quick and come get you. Before I could protest, she was leading me into another room. Her words barely registered through the fog of nausea clouding my brain. Stumbling inside, I collapsed into the fragrant black sheets, too weak to care about anything other than the pain in my gut. The door clicked shut, and it took a moment before I realized where I was. This room was different from the rest of the mansion. Darker, more mature, with heavy drapes and leather furniture screaming masculinity. Shit. I turned my gaze up to the ceiling and it hit me like a freight train. This was Kent's bedroom. Panic! I tried to sit up, to call Annie back, but my body wouldn't cooperate. I felt too weak and nauseous, and the room spun around me like some twisted carnival ride. I needed to get out of here before Kent found me in his room for crying out loud, but as I forced myself to my feet and stumbled for the door, my vision tripled. I barely registered the sound of footsteps on the other side before swinging the door open. My nose crashed into a hard wall of muscle, and we both went down, tangled in a heap on the floor. The force of it knocked the breath out of me, and before I could begin to make sense about what happened, something soft pressed against my lips. My eyes flew open, and where I was met by Kent's wide green eyes. I should have turned down Annie's invite to dinner. Now, here I was, kissing her father. 1 week later. No, I whispered in my phone in an almost pleading tone. Annie's voice trickled through my phone speaker. Please, pretty please. I worked on my assignment when I was in the study, and I mistakenly packed a few of his documents in my binder. He needs it for a meeting today. I stared blankly at the white walls of my dorm. I wanted to use classes as an excuse, but Annie knew I already didn't have any today. That's why she called. Also, I had no reason to refuse. No, I actually had a pretty good reason to refuse. I kissed her father! The feel of his soft lips and stubble on my face flashed in my head, and I shook it away violently. Is there no other way? Can't you send it through an Uber? Nope. It's confidential. They've already signed, and he needs it for a meeting in his office in the next 30 minutes. Please? Defeated, I headed to her faculty to grab the documents and headed to Richardson Tech. In the lobby, I ignored the gazes of the professionally dressed staff and headed to the receptionist. Lloyd Williams. I'm here to see Mr. Richardson? The blonde at the desk smiled, her lipstick a perfect shade of intimidating red. Mr. Richardson is expecting you. Top floor. Just take the lift. She pointed me in the right direction with a manicured finger that looked like it could double as a weapon. Thanks, I mumbled and continued to the elevator. The elevator ride felt like it took an eternity, even though it was only a few seconds. I stepped out into a hallway that was so perfectly clean and beautiful that I didn't want to breathe too hard in case I missed up the vibe. At the moment, the secretary's desk was empty, so I paused, indecisive about the next thing to do. Should I knock? I moved to the heavy wooden door at the end of the hallway, and after a moment's internal debate, knocked lightly. Come in, a smooth, deep voice called from within. Pushed the door open. Behind a large desk, Kent Richardson was sitting with his eyes strained on some papers in front of him. His gaze fell on my lips, and my brain betrayed me by flashing back to the last time I seen him so close. On mine. Mr. Richardson? I began, my voice catching on the last syllable. Kent, he corrected, not looking up from the papers. Excuse me? Call me Kent. This time he looked up and our eyes locked. Suddenly, I felt like I was the only person in the room. "Oh," I stammered, trying to ignore the way my stomach did a weird flip-flop under his gaze. "Kent." His eyelids fell shut. Then he let out a low groan that made the hairs on my back stand on end. What was that about? I held my ground awkwardly, not sure if I was supposed to sit or run out the door. "The documents?" he asked, eyebrow cocked, clearly waiting for me to get my act together. Right. Yeah." I jostled forward, fishing the papers out of my bag. As I passed them over, our fingers brushed, and I swear to God, it sent a jolt straight to my gut. What's wrong with me? Is it because he looks like Annie? Just as he relieved me of the documents in my hand, the door behind me opened and a woman peeked in. "Your 3 o'clock is here." "Thanks, Rachel," Kent answered. The tone he used was very dismissive, but not unkind. She nodded and left as quick as she'd come. Guess that's my cue to leave as well. "I guess I'll be leaving then," I said, more to myself than to him as I turned to leave before I made a fool of myself with the weird butterflies on my stomach. Also, I had a shift in 2 hours. "Where are you off to?" Kent's voice stopped me in my tracks. I don't know if it was my illusion, but ever since the kiss, he cared more. "I have a shift at the restaurant by 5, I turned back, feeling like a kid caught sneaking out after curfew. Kent leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowed slightly. "I know you used to work there." "You used to?" My brain was flooded with confusion. "I still work there." He shook his head, checking the time on his silver watch. "No more of that. You look exhausted. Rest here a while. I'll come get you when I'm done with this meeting." It wasn't a suggestion. It was more of a command that left me off balance. He was an authoritarian and it unsettled me. "I'm not really tired," I argued, but the yawn that let itself free from my open lips said everything, making Kent's smile widen just a bit more. "No arguments. Sofa. Now." It seemed like it wasn't worth arguing with this dude, really, because he could buy and sell me with a snap of his fingers anyway. I settled on a sleek couch on the left. No sooner had my head hit the armrest, the week's stress caught up, and before I knew it, sleep whisked me away. 2 hours later. A gentle touch started on my chin, and then it traveled up to pat my head. I relaxed, letting out a satisfied groan. Then the scent of Dior Sauvage hit me, and my eyes flew open. My head wasn't on the couch armrest anymore. Nope, it was on something much softer, much more expensive, and it smelled good. Really good. Kent Richardson's lap. Fuck. That was one of the few times I had ever said it, but now seemed like the perfect time. I scrambled up, all but knocking Kent's arm away in the process. My face was probably red enough to put a fire truck to shame, and I couldn't bear to look at him. Kent chuckled, low and rumbling in a way that only served to make things a little bit worse. "Say that again," he teased. I opened my mouth and then closed it again, completely lost words. "Are you hungry?" Kent asked, rising to his feet and straightening his ruffled suit courtesy of me. His cool, calm demeanor just made me feel more nervous. "No, I started to say, but my stomach growled deeply then. "Perfect. Just perfect." Amusement flickered into Kent's eyes. "Come on, let's get you something to eat." And I found myself half embarrassed and half captivated by the older man as I left the office with him. We were walking along side by side toward the elevator, and I wondered what the hell was happening to my life. 2 months ago, I was just a college student, struggling to get grades, having a part-time job, and having a crush on my best friend. But now I was virtually sleeping in the lap of one of the most powerful men in the city and following him to go out God knows where. I had to clarify again. I'm not going to spy on Annie. I don't like Cody either, but it doesn't feel right. If that's the reason why you're still paying my bills, please stop. That's not the reason. Kent turned around, patting my head as naturally as possible. I like taking care of you. Once again, my heart started beating crazily. I was barely aware of where my feet were taking me. Only that Kent's hand, warm and heavy, fell from his usual comforting pat on my head to rest on the nape of my neck. My skin buzzed where his fingers lightly pressed, tracing an invisible line that sent shivers down my spine. Truthfully, whatever this was, makes sense. Kent was Kent Richardson. Annie's father, but the way his fingers lingered just a second longer than necessary on my stomach, or how his thumb brushed on the base of my skull, sent my thoughts spiraling. Suddenly, I couldn't ignore the strange flip in my stomach, or the way my knees threatened to give out beneath me. I'd been feeling this way since the kiss a week ago. Holy crap, I liked him. The epiphany hit me like a ton of bricks. Was I losing it? Was this some kind of college student stress disorder where you start thinking crazy things about your best friend's incredibly attractive and possibly out-of-bounds dad? I had to know this feeling, this sudden explosion of insane curiosity, was real. Kent. My voice came out like a squeak, but I pushed through the embarrassment and tilted my head up to meet his gaze. Can I kiss you? The words hung between us, ridiculous and bold. Kent froze, his cold expression cracking. He took a half-step back, letting his hand fall away from my neck. That touch, now gone, felt like a cold spot on my skin that I immediately missed. Yes, but are you sure? His voice was low, the kind that could stop you in your tracks. All I heard was yes. Everything else in that hallway blurred. I leaned up, toes straining against the carpet, and pressed my lips to his. The world tilted on its axis. My heart went from beating out of control to flat out crashing through my ribcage. Kissing Kent was like touching a live wire. My whole body lit up, nerve endings sparking. Nothing else mattered except the fact that he was kissing me back. At first, he was gentle, cautious, letting me set the pace, but then, almost as if he couldn't help himself, he took over. His hands found my waist, fingers gripping just tight enough to make my head spin. I struggled to pull away, muttering incoherently. I feel obligated to return the money. Annie would kill me if she found out why you gave it to me in the first place. You didn't spy or help keep Cody away from her. She has nothing to be mad about. You can keep the money. I hated myself for being happy with the statement. I'd never had financial security in my entire life, and this was the closest I ever gotten to it. Was it so bad? And then I saw her. Annie. She stood at the end of the hallway, eyes wide, frozen in place like she'd stumbled onto a crime scene. Jerked back, my lips tingling with the loss of Kent's kiss. His hands fell away as we turned to face her, but the damage was done. The shock on her expression morphed into something far more dangerous. Anger. Betrayal. You. Annie's voice wavered, low and thick with emotion, before it rose to a shrill accusation. You're sleeping with my dad for money? Sleeping? I just kissed a man. The accusation hit like a slap. I blinked, but my head's still spinning, trying to process her words. No, it's not like that, I stammered, desperate to explain. Kent stepped forward, his voice firm but calm. Annie, keep your voice down. Don't tell me to stop, she shouted, eyes blazing as she turned her fury on him. You told me you weren't going to sponsor anyone when Lloyd lost his scholarship. I even pleaded with you. So she told him about me. Why did he try to manipulate it into a deal? And you. Annie pointed an accusing finger at me, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. Spying? Keeping Cody away? I knew you liked me, but this was crazy. You knew? My voice was small, weak. I wasn't heartbroken, rather I was embarrassed. You knew I liked you all along. Yes, I knew, she spat back, her voice dripping with disdain. I thought you were just some infatuated kid, harmless, but this? I didn't think you'd go after my dad. I didn't go after him. The kiss was hard to explain. I kissed him and I enjoyed every second of it. Annie, you don't understand. How could you? You've had everything handed to you. You've never experienced hunger or the despair of unpaid bills, so don't judge me. Annie snapped. So you couldn't have asked me for the money instead? I liked you. I didn't want to ask you for anything. Despite you pushing me over and constantly asking me to run the weirdest errands, I was at your beck and call because I actually liked you. Kent reached out, his hand hovering over my shoulder. Annie, he didn't betray you. He refused to, despite how much he needed the money. I just saw how much he was struggling when you introduced me to him, so I decided to sponsor him. I flinched away from Kent's touch, to tears spilling over. Don't. I choked out, taking a step back. You know, all of this happened because you're a control freak. You want to control things you like. Was I one of those things? You want to control everything. Annie can date whoever she wants. She's an adult. I can do as I please with my part-time job and my life. You can't control this. You can't control me just because you have money. Lloyd. Ken's voice softened, but I couldn't stand to hear it. Not now. Not when everything felt like it was falling apart. No! I shook my head, backing away even further. You can't control her either. And I don't need your money. I'll pay you back. Every cent. Annie hissed at both myself and her father. You disgust me. I'm sorry. My voice cracked as I turned and bolted down the hallway, not stopping until I was out of the building, out of their sight, and out of breath. It's all ruined. 1 month later. Customers trickled out of the restaurant, followed by the staff. I was in charge of lockup, so I returned to the staff room, changing out of my uniform. The two ladybirds kissing on the clock, and the dim light reminded me of Kent. From the moment I realized my feelings for him, everything I saw reminded me of him. It was driving me crazy. But I was determined not to contact him or his daughter again. Every bone in my body ached. I'd been taking part-time job after part-time job, and the exam session was upon me. All of this was a desperate effort to repay what I had spent out of Kent's money, but all my work barely made a dent in my bills. In 2 weeks, exams would start, and I wouldn't have time for all my jobs. Why did things have to be so hard? I switched off all the lights and grabbed my bag. Swinging a key around my finger, I hummed while I locked up. The cool night air wrapped around me as I closed the doors. And just as I was done, my phone beeped with a message. It was probably an apology message from Annie. She sent many in the past month, but I just couldn't look at her the same. We were from different worlds. I'd never truly understand her, and she'd never truly understand my reasoning. But when I pulled out my phone, the message wasn't from Annie. It was from my bank. Kent Richardson just sent you $20,000. My blood pressure went through the roof. What in the actual hell? I had been busting my balls to pay him back, and now he's just throwing more money at me? I itched to return the money, but I didn't have his account number. My anger was now overflowing, and before I knew what was happening, I found myself mumbling to no one like some crazy man, pounding my feet on the pavement. I need to find him, get his account number, and be done with this shit. The street was silent, the kind of quiet that only comes at night. As I stormed down the street, headlights of an incoming car washed over me. Squinting against the brightness, I raised a hand to shield my eyes. The car rolled to a stop, and before I could think out what was happening, the door opened. And there he was. Kent Richardson, in all his devastatingly handsome glory, stepped out of the car. His eyes caught mine, and the action caused my stomach to flip over in a fashion that was both really annoying and undeniably thrilling. Looking for me? His voice was smooth, the kind that can make a person weak in the knees. And I was no exception, much as I hated to admit it. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words came out in a jumbled mess. Yes. I need your bank account number. You gotta stop sending me money. Kent's head tilted to the side, a thin smile playing on his lips as he closed the distance between us. Say that to my face. My heart leapt out of my chest, but I wasn't about to back down now. I stormed up to him, ready to tell him just how I felt. By the instant I closed the distance, he swept me in for a warm, utterly unexpected hug. It hit me then, right in the warmth of his arms, the stress, the confusion, the pure intensity of my feelings for him, a man so much older than me. It was all too much, and before I could help it, tears welled up in my eyes and spilled over. Kent's hand came up to gently pat my back, his voice soft. Just relax, Lloyd. Let me take care of you. It's all I ever wanted to do. I wanted to push him away, to insist that I wasn't some charity case. All I could muster was a strangled whisper. I feel like a user. What will people say? Kent let out a low chuckle, the kind that rumbled in his chest and made me feel like an idiot for worrying. They'll say I'm an old man robbing the cradle. A tiny laugh escaped my lips, even though my cheeks were still wet with tears. Annie, I said, the name coming out more like a plea than a statement. She misses you, you know. His hand slid up the nape of my neck, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. It'll take her some getting used to, but she'll be fine. I'll let her do whatever she wants with Cody. I wanted to say something about my jobs, about how hard I've been working to pay him back, but before I could get the words out, Kent laughed. A full, deep laugh that made me stop in my tracks. His eyes crinkled at the corners, and for a moment, all I could do was stare, completely mesmerized by how happy he looked. "What's so funny?" I asked, attempting not to sound whiny, but it came out like that anyways. "You," he replied, still smiling. "You're just so cute and innocent. It's what I've always liked about you." Heat surged to my face, and before I can think better of it, I was up on my toes, kissing him. It was a light, fleeting kiss, barely touching his lips, but 1,000 fireworks went off inside me. "This is my first time liking a man," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Kent's grin widened, making my stomach flip. "It will be the last." I rolled my eyes, smacking him lightly on the chest. "You're so damn controlling. You know that?" He feigned innocence, holding up my hands. "I'm working on it." I let out a long breath, looking at him, finally searching his eyes for something that I wasn't even sure of. "So, where does that leave us?" Kent's expression softened, and he reached out, his thumb brushing against my cheek. "It leaves us in a relationship. Any objections?" I facepalmed, shaking my head with a smile. "You're hopeless, you know that?" He chuckled, and before he could say anything else, I pulled him down for another kiss. We were unconventional, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid or worried. I knew that he would take care of everything. Ken tried his best to respect my independence, and I let him take care of me in ways I didn't even know I needed. Like we hoped, Cody and Annie broke up. He cheated on her, and she had to learn her lesson the hard way. Rebuilding our friendship was a weird work in progress, but it was fine. Having peace of mind enabled me to focus on my studies, and I regained my scholarship, but still, my phone often dinged with a message from my bank. "Kent Richardson just sent you $20,000. Question: do you desire to be taken care of too?" Hey, thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force, and stay wholesome.